children who might be very picky can be highly offended by food that shows up on their plate that they don't like.
It is an offense on there.
It's offensive.
It's exactly person.
It is. So one of the little tricks you can do is have a learning plate. You can touch this. You can pick it up and smell it. You can lick it. You can put it in your mouth and chew it. But there's no pressure to eat it. And you say, you don't have to eat it.
Being a mom is the toughest job there is, and it doesn't come with instructions. So it's okay if you don't have all the answers. We'll figure it out together. This is Mom Brain with Hilaria Baldwin and Daphne Oz.
I'm Jill Castle. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I specialize in pediatric nutrition. I've been in the field of pediatric nutrition for over 27 years. I'm an author of several books, consultant and speaker, and mom of 4.
Thank you.
4 excellent eaters.
Yes. 4 very good eaters that we can aspire to. So I was super excited to have you on today because my second child is, I believe, and obviously this is, everybody else who has a picky eater believes this too, like the most difficult eater in the whole wide world. Like, he just won't try things.
Yeah.
If you present the food that he normally eats in a little bit of a different way, he won't go near it. You can bribe him, you can offer him anything. He's just like, fine, I don't need chocolate. Like, you ask him, do you want chocolate? I'll give you chocolate after this. And he'll say, yes, I want it. And then you say, well, you have to eat this first. He says, I won't eat chocolate. Yeah. So it's very difficult. And I've been trying to not make it a thing. Mm-hmm. And he was like this since he was a baby, by the way. Mm-hmm. To the point where, I was used to with my daughter, if she didn't want to try something, I literally would like shove it in her mouth, and then she'd realize that she actually liked it and would be fine with it. Yeah. And I did that with him once when he was like under a year, and he started vomiting.
Oh.
And so and then of course I think that I've just like broken him.
No.
I've broken him, and it was like oatmeal with like, I don't know, something like, delicious on top of it. Totally. It was like how dare you, had like syrup on it or something that like I was like, this is a treat, you don't understand.
Yeah.
And he so anyway, then I started like, because of that experience, I was like, all right, why don't you tell me what you need? But at the same time, a 3-year-old should not always dictate what they eat.
Right. It's so funny because I see parents always saying, what would you like to eat? And I'm like, never ask a toddler what they want to eat, ever. Yeah. Never, ever, ever. Because they're only going to tell you what they want. They don't know the world of food. Mm-hmm. So, as parents, we're always sort of guiding and leading them through the world of food and gradually introducing different things for them. I think when children are really showing early signs of pickiness, like your son has, I would question, a couple of different things. Kids have more taste buds than adults do. And some children are super tasters, meaning they have even more than the average child. And so flavors like bitter are even like 10 or 20 times more bitter. Things like sour or even textures can be really offensive. And children learn really fast. They're so smart. They learn that they don't like something, it doesn't taste good, it doesn't feel good in their mouth, and they back away from it. Then we have this whole other element of parenting around food. I call it food parenting. And that can enhance or sort of complicate the issue. And where you had an older daughter who willingly let you feed her, other children just aren't going to let you do that. And so, one of the things I talk about with parents is really understanding the child that you have in front of you. And you guys know you have, 7 kids between the two. Every child's different. And every child's response to food is different. And it's hard when you have multiple children to cater to that different child or that child who might have more sensitivities while also feeding the rest of the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you make of, because I've been told this a lot and I have then repeated it to many parents who have, this is the most common question I get asked in the world of food is, what do I do about picky eating? What do I do about getting my children to enjoy healthy foods? How do I set them up for a lifetime of adventurous eating? And I was told early on that it can take a child 10 to 20 times to learn to like something. Mm-hmm. So they may truly hate it the first time, and being represented with it time after time after time, they can develop a taste for it.
Yeah.
Is there science behind that?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of science behind it. And in fact, if you look at the science, it can take a child. Well, some children will like a food right off the bat the first time they taste it, right? Some children will take 10 times, 20 times. Kids who are super tasters or who have texture sensitivities or even like a sensitivity to the appearance of food or the smell or odor of food, it can take them 50 times.
Wow.
Some kids will never like a particular food we want them to. And you know what? Honestly, that's okay because we have so many different foods in this world that we can, get them to like. I hear parents all the time really want their children to eat broccoli or eat vegetables. And yeah, that's the end goal, but it's a long game. What the science tells us is the most powerful thing you can do to help a child try new food is repeated exposure. So in the case of broccoli, steamed broccoli, stir-fried broccoli, roasted broccoli, cream of broccoli soup, all different kinds of ways. Broccoli ravioli.
Broccoli gnocchi actually works really nicely
Yes.
because then it tastes like potato.
Broccoli on a pizza.
great.
I mean, there's so many different ways to offer broccoli, but parents get stuck on steamed broccoli. I'm like that, steamed broccoli is a tough one for kids. It doesn't have salt. It doesn't have
And
sweet.
they try
it
to
doesn't
call them
have
trees. I've read that put mashed potatoes down and then put the broccoli on top of it, so it looks like you're in a forest. And I'm just like, okay, great. Maybe your kids will go for that. Mine will not.
Yeah.
But we have to go to France for a second because this is a perfect example. The whole, construct this perfect universe where your child can fantasize about broccoli being trees and maybe that will make them more excited. And then there are all these books, bringing up Bebe and French kids eat everything and blah, blah, blah. There are two things that I am mesmerized by in probably just European children in general. One is that I don't know that their parents care enough or have the time or the bandwidth to think about doing as creative endeavors as that to make their children eat food. Food is just kind of presented and they are expected to eat like the adults eat and apparently do. And granted, that's a huge overgeneralization, but that sort of is what's put out there. So, and then the second thing that they don't do is they never snack. And snacking in our family is a really big problem. Really big problem.
Me too.
Snacking in the car, snacking on your way to whatever you're doing, and it does. I think a lot of the time, the reason we struggle at mealtime to get kids to eat healthy foods is because they're not that hungry because they've been eating all day,
Exactly.
So what do you make of all the sort of creative ways we try to get our kids to eat? And then what do we do with snacking in general?
Yeah. So creativity with kids, food should be fun. And so I don't think that being creative is a bad thing, but I think if we are doing it all the time, I also think kids get on to their parents and they're kind of like,
totally.
Okay, Mom, I know what you're trying to do.
Well, they love
here.
attention. They're like, oh, this is a great way I can withhold and my mom will pay more attention to me. This is amazing.
But the snacking part, is a challenge too because kids are snacking a lot. And when we look at young children, so toddlers, 3 snacks a day, one of those snacks is literally like a cup of milk or a cup of dairy alternative, whatever you're serving. It's not like your traditional cracker-based snack. As children get older, 2 snacks a day, teenagers, 1 snack a day. The key, though, is this little interval that you set up between meals and snacks should be about 2 to 3 hours for a really young child or 3 to 4 hours for an older child so that they do come to the table hungry. So they have an opportunity to build an appetite. So their stomach has a chance to empty. The hunger hormones fire to the brain. Child says, ooh, I'm hungry. I'm getting all the physical signs. And then, boom, there's a meal or there's a snack. And, obviously something nutritious, well-balanced, flavorful,
what are some of
interesting.
Your favorite snacks for young kids? Like 3 to 7. What are some of your favorite snacks?
I love combo snacks. I always teach my clients to pick a protein source when you're planning a snack because it's very good at holding satiety for a longer period of time. So cheese or milk or lean protein or nuts, beans, any kind of snack. So hummus and vegetables, peanut butter on crackers, melted cheese on a tortilla. I like real food snacks that are a combination of either a carbohydrate and protein or a healthy fat like an avocado or olive oil, like a dressing, and either fruit and vegetables or grains or something of that nature. But making it like at least 2 food groups, not just here's a bag of popcorn. That's not going to sustain a child for 3 or 4 hours. They're going to come back an hour later hungry. Or if they are just having sort of a sugary sweet snack, that's not going to sustain their hunger. They're going to come back in an hour and they're going to complain of hunger.
Right.
And so when a child is constantly saying, I'm hungry, of course a parent's going to be like, oh my gosh, I've got to feed this kid. They must be growing, or I'm not giving them enough. And I always ask parents to sort of dial back the clock and think about, okay, what did they eat at the earlier part of the day? Did they have a nutritious breakfast? Did they have a morning snack? What was that snack? Did it sustain them? What was lunch? And if they didn't eat a good lunch, a lot of times toddlers don't, they pick at lunchtime. They don't have a good lunchtime. And we actually do rely on snacks for toddlers to be sort of creating that opportunity to fill in what they missed at mealtime.
You know what I've tried recently with Raphael, who's the picky one, is because I was noticing that he would snack in the afternoon, especially because he's at that weird age where he's not napping most days now, but sometimes he does, and then that just changes everything. And then because I have so many kids that are young, which both of you guys can relate to, there's so many different times that people need to eat. Like there's always something going on in the kitchen, or packing a lunch or whatever it is. But so what I've done with him recently is switch snack and dinner. So once it gets to be 4, 4:30, 5, 5:30, and he's asking for, I provide them with healthy snacks, but they are still snacks. And then he's not really eating his dinner. I say, okay, I'm going to go into the kitchen and I cook him his meal. And then I find that when he has that moment of hunger, he's more likely to eat more of it. And then towards bedtime, because then I was like, oh gosh, well, what's he going to be? Then I give him his snack towards bedtime.
Yeah.
I
a lot
love
of times
that.
parents will do that. They'll flip.
I do that a lot of the time on school days because, to your point about kids picking at lunchtime, it's usually when they're not with us, they're at school, they kind of, are distracted, their friends are there, they're hanging out, they pick at lunch, then they're really hungry by 4:35. So they have dinner early on the weekdays, and then they might have a snack later before bed, but they have their big meal early on. And I wonder, it's funny, it's good, I'm glad to hear you say that that's totally fine and that that's what you do too, because I was always, I don't know, I felt a little anxious, like they'd wake up in the middle of the night hungry, and I don't think it actually works that way. They just wake up really hungry for a good breakfast, which actually is nice. What are some of the biggest hurdles to balance nutrition that you think American children are dealing with right now?
Yeah, I think fruits and vegetables are probably the biggest thing that kids are dealing with. They're not getting enough of them. Vegetables obviously are probably the one food group that is the leader on what they're not getting enough of. But there's so many comparable nutrients in both fruits and vegetables that I'm always like, offer the vegetables, but offer fruit with every meal. Because if a lot of kids like fruit. And if your child eats fruit, then lay off on the pressure and the stress about the vegetables. Just keep offering them. Do that repeated exposure, that 10 to 15 to 20 to 50 times. Yeah. Those vegetables have to show up if your child's ever going to have a chance of tasting them, then eating them, then liking them. So you have to taste them first, right? And so the vegetables need to show up. And
what if they won't try them?
It's okay. Like, you're still exposing.
So you say it's better. So if I know, because this was the point, when my children were younger, I would go across the street and buy all these organic vegetables and create this whole meal. And then they would look at me and be like, you eat it. You know what I mean? I was like, absolutely not. They're not going to try it. And so then I just stopped trying. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, I have certain things in the day. I know my difficult eater is having protein, and I will make a smoothie that he will eat that has kale and spinach in it. And then I know that he's, we are a nut friendly house. We can eat nuts, so they have a lot of different nuts. And so he's having all of the food groups. It's just not many different options within the food groups.
Yeah.
And so, but maybe it sounds like one of the biggest mistakes that I'm making is I just stopped trying because I didn't want to create a fight. I mean, I'm also very nervous of starting an eating disorder. I'm very open that I had an eating disorder until I was 25 years old, from 5 until 25 years old. And I'm I'm trying to keep it to be a happy table. But at the same time, then I struggle with not, exposing him to more foods. And I'm like, okay, you'll eat this every day? I know it's healthy. Go for it.
Yeah. There's an interesting study that was done on parents and this whole idea of repeated exposure. And so they determined that, we need to do it 10, 20, 50 times, whatever it takes. And then actually accept if our children are never going to like broccoli, let's just accept it and move on, because we do create a lot of drama around that broccoli, and that's not good for our kids. It doesn't help them develop a healthy relationship with that food.
Right.
But this study also looked at parents and parents giving up.
Yeah.
And what they showed was that, I think it was like after 4 rejections, 3 or 4 rejections of a food, parents just said, okay, they don't like this, I'm not going to do it anymore.
That's definitely me.
And so there's this huge gap. If you have to do at least 20 exposures and you're giving up at 4, we're just not even kind of
interesting
getting close to moving the needle. So my thing is, I'm always telling parents, you have a job, and it's a very simple job. It's you prepare the food, you get it on the table, and you sit down and you be a pleasant mom or dad at the table, and you enjoy the meal, and you don't talk about the food that's on the table. You don't pressure the kids to take a bite. You just enjoy the company and community of the meal. The child has 2 jobs. That is deciding whether they're going to eat what you've made and offered, and deciding how much they're going to eat. And it's called actually the division of responsibility. Ellen Satter is a dietitian like myself and a social worker who conceived of this concept. And she basically divides the responsibility of parenting from the child. And the bottom line is, your job is really just to expose your children to all these different foods and create these balanced snacks and meals, but really then pull yourself out of it. Like, you pat yourself on the back, you've done your job. You don't have to make your child eat. Your child needs to learn how to navigate what you've put out there. And I say to parents all the time, you cannot make a child eat. Mm-hmm. And if you get into the business of trying to make your child eat or trying to taste, you will always lose. Unfortunately, that's my lived experience as a mother. It's my experience as a pediatric nutritionist. Kids have to have agency over their own bodies and their choices. And all we can do really as parents is expose them to the wonderful world of food and not lay that pressure on. Because when we pressure, when we nag, when we remind, when we bribe and reward, or when we restrict, we create a whole different dynamic around eating that can really change their food preferences, their relationship with food.
Right.
And can color how they feel about certain foods.
Okay, family eating, family dinners. Now, I love, the idea of eating with my children, but having a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 10-month-old, my job is actually to just put food in their mouth, because especially my 2-year-old and definitely my 10-month-old, I can't. I mean, the 2-year-old sort of can feed himself, but not really. And the 10-month-old was like, forget about it. So I've heard that it's extraordinarily important for them to watch you eat. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, you've prepared me there's 4 different meals that are going on, relatively similar, but 4 different meals going on. And I'm sitting there, having them eat it, and they are not seeing me do the same thing because there's no opportunity for me to do that. Or it feels like that maybe I'm not trying hard enough. But I really have it be, focused at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever it is when they actually are eating, to have it be about them. But I feel like I'm also not showing a good example, don't you feel?
Well, I would say let's cut yourself a break because your kids are really young. And I remember when mine were that young, I literally would line them up on the kitchen bar and I would stand on one side and I'd be dealing out food and helping them and just supervising. But I was always there with them, but I wasn't necessarily eating with them. When they got older, so when they started to get into school, we started eating, when I could bump the dinner up a little later,
Right.
because I used to feed them at 5 o'clock on the dot also. But when they got into school, I could move the dinner hour to 5:30 or 6, and my husband and I could join them. And that's when it becomes really important for them to watch. I mean, always it's important for them to watch you eat and be with you. Even the little ones, the 10-month-old. Sometimes I say to my parents, your 10-month-old should really be eating the family food, really be moving towards eating what's on the family plate and self-feeding. But sit that baby on your lap when you're having your food, and just that community, that togetherness, watching the other children eat. It's not all on mom or on dad to be the role model. The older children are role models too. But it's that sense of coming together and that community, and there's a lot to be learned. But I will say, as kids get older, they absolutely, I believe, need to be with their parents at mealtime at least a few times during the week so they can see them eating.
Well, they do all kinds of studies about the value, the way that children's performance in school adjusts when there's regular family meals, the way that their ability to have positive social friendships at school, like all of the social dynamics that happen around the dinner table end up helping them in a dramatic way in the rest of their lives. And it's also a place for them to share and to come together with the family and understand that they have an anchor there and that they have a valued community there and that they are valuable members of that community.
Yes.
So I think family meal is critical on so many levels. I remember my dad was he was in medical school when I was born. He was a resident throughout a lot of my childhood. So he spent long hours at the hospital. This was before they apparently now have put some caps on like how many hours doctors can legitimately spend at a hospital at a time. I know, because he would have 80-hour shifts. It was insane. There were nights that he would not come home at all. But the nights that he came home, I remember sitting down to dinner at like 9 o'clock at night, just so we could have that family meal moment, which it was in retrospect, it was very valuable and amazing and a great, otherwise we would never have gotten to see him. But it was also probably disruptive to our relationship with when to eat, because it just was so late at night.
And when to go
we were
to sleep.
very Spanish when we were growing up, and when to go to sleep. My actually, that's a whole other topic of discussion, but my mother insists we never had bedtimes, and I still think I'm catching up on sleep that I missed as a child.
But this is another interesting thing, because not only are you people who are in relationships, are you a parent or co-parents with this, but you're also a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever is to that. And I have to say that one of the things that is working right now for my relationship is the fact that it's like the whirlwind of, feed,
crazy dinner
bathe,
time,
brush teeth, pajamas, story time, go to bed. And then Alec and I are like, okay, now it's you and me.
Yeah.
And then we go and we eat together.
Yes.
And so that's the one thing that, I worry. I'm looking forward to family dinners, hopefully at some point.
But you don't want to lose that.
But at the
date
same
time,
time, like we regularly have our date time. Even last night, I literally were so tired, and we're both laying on couches next to each other at 8 p.m. and we're just like traumatized looking, but we're doing it together. You know.
Yeah.
You guys are cute too. You have your cereal nights on
We have
nights that you just
cereal
can't
nights.
get
That's
out of the house. There's something very romantic in having your bowls of cereal on the couch and just talking.
And it's like glamour cereal. It's like Chex.
Oh yeah,
It's great.
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with Chex. Love it. I think but I hate to harp on about the European model, but there is something to me about an acknowledgement that food is this really life enriching experience, this fun way to enjoy yourself, to explore, to travel, to be grateful for the plenty that you have, all of this stuff. But I think that we heighten the stress and pressure around it because we pay a lot of attention to individual micronutrients and to breaking it down into little things. And I know that despite not wanting this to happen, I feel like I keep a tally in the back of my head of like, oh, my kid had avocado today and she had chicken and she had pasta with butter, which wasn't great, but then she also had flax crackers. So I'm doing this whole like calculation in my head.
Yeah.
And I think I wonder how much additional pressure we put on ourselves, and whether that actually. I loved what you were saying about Your job is just to make the food and put it on the table, and then let your kid go from there with this sort of, they're coming into their own, their ego, their adult agency of like, I like this, I don't like this, I want to eat this tonight, I don't want to eat this tonight. I'm thinking in my head, it could be kind of fun to create a game at dinner time. You can get, sort of a laminated rainbow, and over the course of the week, have your kids fill in each color of the rainbow that they ate, not each day. That's what my point is. I worry about us pressurizing every day, and that's not really when it tallies. It's over the course of, I think, 3 or 4 days, and certainly the week, that you want to make sure your kids are having a balance of things, balance of colors, balance of textures, flavors, etc. How do we cut back on some of the pressure that we feel?
It's interesting, because as you were saying that, I was like, well, you are doing something that we know in the research is very valuable for childhood nutrition, which is called maternal monitoring. And so that is, it's not controlling what your children are eating. It's not overstressing and over focusing on the different foods and nutrients, but it is having an awareness of how your children are eating throughout the week. Are they eating their fruits and vegetables? Are they showing up? Are they eating too many sweets, for example? Do I need to dial back? That's all maternal monitoring, and I actually think we all should be doing that, but not to the point of obsessing about, food and nutrients. But I will say that I honestly, as I've been in this business for 27 years, my kids are older now. I've done the whole birth all the way through, adulthood, and I've come to the conclusion that we probably worry too much about food in our society and not enough about feeding, which is the interaction around food, and not enough about where our kids are in their development and their temperament and how that influences how they eat. Because when we are really focused on feeding as equally as we are on food, then we get kids who have a great relationship with food. We get adventurous eaters. We get kids who are willing to try anything and aren't going to be, oh my God, that's bad for me, and I can't have this. I'm going to have a disease in 20 years, or, this is toxic for you. I think when we get into that mindset with food and we start teaching our children that mindset, it's not helping them develop a good relationship with food.
But I think at the same time, teaching our children, one of the things that as I went through my eating disorder, as I talked to a lot of people about food through that lens, and also just with being a yoga teacher, is that we don't, exactly what you're saying, we don't learn how to eat.
Right.
And we are not arming our children with, when am I full? When am I hungry? I ate this. Maybe that's why I'm feeling a certain way. But being able to give that information and, like you say, not obsessing about it, but it's okay to also say, hey, you know what? There's the dirty dozen that you should, that you shouldn't be eating if it's not organic, and that is toxic. Or, this family is believers that you eat kosher, and these people don't eat dairy, and these people don't eat meat, and these people eat, paleo. So it's like, whatever it is, there's so many different ideas. But if I wished, and this is ultimately how I got over my eating disorder, it wasn't just the experience of food in my mouth or thinking about the food too much. It was, how does it feel as it goes down? How does it feel as it's going through, when you're really hungry and you're like, you're so hungry and you can almost feel it go through like your veins and your stomach. How do I feel the next day? How did I sleep? All these different things. And once I could come to the point where it's like, eating is an experience of my entire body before, after, the next day, as my body digests it. Once I got to that part, I didn't have an eating disorder anymore because I knew when I was hungry. I knew when to stop. I knew what I wanted to eat. I knew that if I ate something that I probably shouldn't, or is not the healthiest thing for me, it was going to be okay. Yeah. It wasn't going to be like, okay, end of the world, and I have to punish myself for the next period of time. So all of those different things added up to an awareness that I'm trying to teach my kids. But at the same time, as we go back to, kind of where we began this conversation, what do we do when they say no? Do we? So let's say I'm thinking about you, and I'm already like making my grocery list in my head as we're sitting right here, and I'm like, okay, this is what's going to be on the plate for tonight, and tomorrow it's going to be this, and I'm going to 50 times they're going to see broccoli, and in many different ways. I have it all planned out. But what do I do with Raphael when I have those things on the plate, and he starts crying and screaming and all the typical things that he does when he does not want to eat something, and then he won't eat.
Yeah.
Do I break down and give him his oatmeal with peanut butter and hemp milk that he likes to eat, or the tofu? Those are the two dinners that he will eat.
Yeah.
Do I break down and do that? Because then I'm also teaching him that if he goes through this whole period, then he can get what he wants.
Yeah, your short order cooking.
Exactly.
That's
So
we call
what do I do?
Catering. So we have to kind of dial back to meals and snacks. We want to have those in scheduled. Remember, we talked about the 2 to 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours for older kids. We do want to have a schedule because we then know that our kids are going to be hungry when they show up for those meal times. In terms of what you put on the plate, I have a story about plating versus not plating. But when the kids are really young, we do tend to plate their food. And children who might be very picky can be highly offended by food that shows up on their plate that they don't
Perfectly
like.
put.
It is
So-
an offense on there.
It's offensive.
Exactly what I'm saying.
It is. So one of the little tricks you can do is have a learning plate. So it's a separate plate from what goes on there.
Okay.
What goes on there, it's a separate plate from their dinner plate or their lunch plate. And this learning plate is advertised as such. This is a learning plate. You can touch this. You can pick it up and smell it. You can lick it. You can put it on your lips. You can put it in your mouth and take it out. You can put it in your mouth and chew it.
You give them two plates. One, the dinner he wants.
Or the dinner you've decided to make for
Okay,
him.
well, okay.
Okay.
You come over to my house, you try that. And then the other is the food that I've decided.
That you're introducing
Okay,
to him.
Got it.
And it's a learning plate or an exploring plate or however a tasting
like
plate,
that.
however you want to call it. But there's no pressure to
And a
eat it.
moose-bouche.
I love
And you
this.
say, you don't have to eat it. And I encourage parents to teach their children the difference between tasting and eating because there's a huge difference. Tasting is all of those things. Put it on your mouth, put it on your tongue, chew it, spit it out. Eating is swallowing. It's consuming.
Mm-hmm.
But children have to learn about food before they're oftentimes ready to eat it. So when we tell children, you don't have to eat that, it's like reverse psychology. They calm down, the pressure is gone, they become more open to exploring it, and it's fun. And sometimes for those really picky kids, they need that experience before they're ever going to try to consume something.
I love what you're saying because you're taking the fight out of it.
Absolutely.
Not just by preemptively saying that about the tasting thing, but also what I'd brought up before about then he's going to scream and cry, and then I'm going to end up, breaking down and giving him exactly what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you take that out because they're both options right there, and I can give him two plates. I'm just totally doing this. I'm
Yeah.
like starting today.
We should never fight about food with our kids.
Yes.
That was one of the first bits of really memorable parenting advice that I got from my grandmother. She said, "Don't let that fight don't let them resist you more than the food."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I think is so critical because it is you versus your child at a certain point, and by shutting their mouth and screaming at you or whatever it is, they're going to win. And what
Yes.
is the win there? The win is just, everyone loses.
Erosion of the
essentially.
relationship.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
it's not worth it.
Something that my oldest and I do now, Philomena, she's 5, and she, I think she's, again, it's like horses. They test you to see what they can kind of get away with. So we have a rule now that big girls try everything once. And it's basically, she just has a bite. Anything that I put on the table, she has a bite of. And it can be as small as it needs to be. And sometimes she really pushes the limits on that. But I've noticed now that because it's a stable rule and it's not something that's flexible, it's just there and we both have acknowledged that it's there.
Yeah.
It's much less of a fight. And even better, she started to be very proud when she has that moment of, I tried it. Whether she liked it or not has nothing to do with the emotional feedback she's getting of, I'm a big girl because I tried it once. And that's relieved a lot of my pressure because she's randomly she's converted into my kind of pickiest eater. She used to eat everything, and then at 3.5 or something, she decided she won't eat a fruit. She hates fruit. The only thing I can get her to have is I do apple stacks with this like nutso butter in between, and then I put chocolate on top. So at a certain point, you're like, how healthy is this anymore? But it's those little things where it is a compromise where I try to find ways of introducing foods that are new to her in formats I know she will already like, or in addition to things I know she already likes, like the chocolate, or in a mac and cheese with, I'll put sweet potatoes in, or I'll put butternut squash in. But I also feel like it's also about giving, and it's going back to what you said, Hilaria, about having your children feel not only the sensation of I ate some. I'm going to tell you something that we do. We have the story of poop where and this happened when she was potty training, and we were just sitting on the toilet, and I was telling her stories about how the food moved through her mouth, down her throat, into her stomach, and through her intestines, and then out into the toilet. And I would talk about how certain foods were fun for her and fun for her mouth, and then but they would make her tummy really sad, or the toilet was really sad, or whatever. And then certain foods were to help her tummy feel good and to balance all that out. And I think the reality is giving them ways to acknowledge and pay attention to what their bodies feel like on certain foods without making it a neuroses, and B, feel proud of the experience of eating is a really interesting, gets them to be on your team in a way that
absolutely
limits some of the
working
craziness.
with your child as opposed to having your own agenda that you want your child to carry out.
Yeah.
It always is. It always ends up in a struggle, which is tough for families. Who wants to fight? I mean, you have to feed your child 5 or 6 times a day.
Also, at the end of the day, when you're like, no one wants to fight at the end of the day when everybody's crappy. What we call it? My brother, who has a 14-year-old, who's a very, very healthy eater, taught me this, that we call it tricky food. Because kids love like tricks and stuff like that. And so he taught me to say, this food is really beautiful and it's fun and it maybe has like a character on it and stuff like that, but it's tricking you. It's like in a disguise. So when it goes in your body, it actually doesn't have things in it that make you feel good. So it's tricking you from the front, and they get excited to like point at, oh, that's tricky food. It's trying to trick me.
Yeah.
And not to say that tricky food isn't fun sometimes. I mean, like after dinner last night, I went and got them ice cream across the street, and we had ice cream, which is not very nutritious, but we had a lot of fun eating it. So
which is part of the point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I teach my parents this concept called the 90-10 rule. 90% of what you're eating on a day-to-day basis for children are nutritious, growing foods. 10% are fun foods. Yeah. Fun foods are those sweets and treats, high fat, fried, French fries, sugary, ice cream, all that stuff. They don't have to be eliminated from your child's diet. I actually feel that when we are, with the exception of a child under the age of 2, I don't feel like they should have added sugar in their diet because their bodies are growing at such a rapid pace, and particularly their brain. And their brain is a very calorie hungry and nutrient hungry organ in that first couple of years of life.
But then what do you do when you have 4 children?
And
I
they're-
know
and
you
they're-
know
all
this
the rules go
because
out the
you
window.
do.
No, Nika.
I know that you know this. So, like, I just saw her face change. She's like, except that.
I know.
No,
Yeah.
Nika, my 20-month-old, if she sees, not even, what is she, 15 months? Oh my gosh. She will watch her older siblings get their ice cream at the end of the night and scream at
she
me
wants it.
if she
Sure.
does not get hers, and she loves her ice cream. I have
that's-
lots of videos of her eating ice cream
My
on my
10-month-old
Instagram.
That's role
knows what a
modeling, looking
lolly
in the
is.
other way.
Oh, a lolly is fun.
Oh, they know that. I mean,
A
obviously,
lolly's
I
really
won't let
fun.
him have. But he's definitely. I mean, I posted a video of this a long time on Instagram of him like literally taking as we're about to take off. So I always give them lollies right before takeoff for their ears, and he's taking one out of my mouth and putting it in his mouth, and then I take it back from him. But and at that time, he was like, what, 7 to 8 months at that point? And if that had been my first child, I would have done a cleanse. I would have cried. I would have called the doctor. I'd be like, oh my God, ruined for life. That's it.
Yeah.
It's all downhill. It's been 7 months old and downhill from
But
here.
they do. They see everything those older kids are doing,
And they're
it's just
okay.
like, oh,
It
and
is.
they're exactly, and they're
Yeah,
fine.
and they're okay.
What
exactly.
do you make of juices? And you mentioned a lot of kids will have a glass of milk or a milk alternative. What do you, and juice specifically, what do you think of calorie heavy drinks for kids?
Like sugary drinks, like
I mean,
juices
milk doesn't have, milk is less of a sugary concern, but just drinks that are not water. I grew up with like water being our primary hydration source. I actually cannot remember my mother ever putting a glass of milk on the table for any of us. And that feels very commonplace now. Certainly juice was a special occasion thing. I'd never had that as like, I'm thirsty, I'm going to have a cup of juice, you know? How do you feel about that?
I think Fruit juice, I think, needs to be limited. It's not a crime if there's a little bit every day or every other day, but there's definitely a quantity based on age, and the younger the child, the smaller the quantity. 4 ounces, half a cup, that's not very much at all. Sodas, lemonades, Gatorades, that thing, again, you have to be mindful of that because they are just sugar-based drinks. There's no nutrition in those, or very little nutrition at all. So I personally am a whole food person. I like to eat whole foods. I don't like to drink my calories. I've taught my children not to drink their calories. And to really I find that, whole foods are just much more satisfying and sustaining than a liquid. So that's my take of it. There are a lot of, if we look, as a dietitian, professionally, I look at the whole demographic. So there are lots of kids out there that drink a lot of sugary beverages. And I'm always very mindful of, I understand that those are habits that have been established over time, and it is unlikely that families are going to be able to go from, 2 or 3 sugary beverages to 0. So I'm always sort of mindful of where is the place you want to be, and if you are 3 or 4 drinks a day, dial back to 2 or 3, then step it back down to 1 or 2, then get down to half a cup or 0. So for some families, it's easier to just say, okay, we just won't have those anymore. My kids will drink water. Great. But there are other families that are going to be like, my kid's been raised on juice.
Right.
How am I going to do this? There's no way they'll drink water.
Watering juice down.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, if your child is used to it, it's a little bit more difficult to change the flavor. But, I don't think my kids have juice every day. But if they do ask for one, I won't say no. But I'll say, okay, is this the time when you want to have your one juice? And it is watered down every single time, 100% of the time. But I will let them make that decision. One thing that I found has worked pretty well in my house for them understanding sweets and stuff that we don't typically eat. I mean, I don't feed them dairy. We don't eat. They'll have fish sometimes and eggs sometimes, but other than that, we keep a pretty vegan diet. And that being said, when they're out and they're at a birthday party and there's pizza, they can have the pizza.
Yeah.
They can go and have the ice cream. If we go out and they're going to have brownie, I know that there's milk in it. I know if they're having whatever kind of bread, there might be animal product in it. And that's okay for me. And we talk about that. But our rule is, in our home, we eat a certain way.
Yeah.
And then that goes to the idea of 90% of the time, they're eating really, really well.
Yeah.
And then we might go out, even if we bring it in, like, I brought them to Dylan's Candy the other day, and they're like, get to like pick all this, and they end up eating like these like tiny little pieces, like, and like 4 of them or something like that, like really, really tiny, like maybe like 4 jelly beans or something like that. But those are not stuff that we'll typically keep in our home. We go out, we get it, we consume it, and then it's done.
Yeah. I always say, keep your home a health haven because the outside world
It's
is full of stuff that you're not going to want your child to eat every single day on the regular. So do what you can at your own home to keep it balanced, flexible, nutritious, healthy, and then don't sweat it when they go to a party and eat cupcakes and pizza.
Yeah.
Like,
They'll
let
be
them
okay.
enjoy that food scenario or situation too, because when children feel like they are restricted at a party,
Or
for
left
example,
out.
or left out, they remember that.
Yeah.
Like, there's some interesting studies of adults in college and what they remember about their childhood food experiences, and it's always the negative stuff.
Of course.
It's always the, I had to sit at the table till 10 o'clock to eat my green beans, or my dinner I didn't eat was served for breakfast the next day. They remember all the bad
Wow.
stuff. So we want to have a plan as parents. We want to have like a strategy. Like, this sounds so crazy, and it's not really crazy, but we want a food system, right? We've been talking about the food system. Healthy food 90% of the time, fun foods 10% of the time. But we want a strategy for feeding too. Like, we want to know what our structure is, our schedule. We want to know how we're serving meals. We want to know how we're going to behave as parents around the mealtime. And are we pressuring? Are we making our kids eat? Are we making them sit at the table to take one more bite of this? Like, we don't want to be doing that stuff either. So we do, as parents, need a food system, a feeding strategy, and then we need to know our kid. Is he really picky? So I got to modify some things for this child. Or do I have a teenager who's experimenting with dieting, who's trying all these different things? I've got to make some modifications and be aware of that. Do I have a child in school who is noticing that everybody's bringing, everybody's buying school lunch and bringing all this junk food in? And how am I going to handle that with my kid? What's my strategy? What's my family mantra? What can my child understand and stand behind? Like you were saying before, this is how we eat as a family. I think that's very powerful and empowering for a child to be able to say, when they're faced with these different scenarios, with their friends, to be able to think in their head, I know how our family eats, and I can see that this is different, and I can appreciate that, and I can go home and talk to my mom or my dad about what I saw that was different, and my mom or dad will help me deal with that.
Mm-hmm. It was so funny, actually. Listening to you talk about kids who remember the negatives or who remember how different life could be in the world around them vis-a-vis food versus what it was at home. Because I grew up a very overweight kid and in a family full of health nuts. And at home, we had this bounty of very healthful foods. Like I said, we didn't drink a lot of juices or anything like that. We didn't keep chips in the house or candy. We really, my mom modeled for us, and I think I've tried to do that for my kids now. We crowded out the bad options with good at home. But I remember, I have this really distinct memory, and you jogged it for me when you said, middle school kids start buying their own lunch and things at school. The thin girls in my grade would eat French fries and a Diet Coke every single lunch. And and this was someone who grew up in a family where health knowledge was very prevalent and discussed. And, our dinner table conversation could be minimally invasive cardiothoracic techniques and vitamin D therapy. I mean, it was crazy. And I remember thinking, well, they're thin. Maybe that's what thin people eat. And so there was a couple weeks period where I would eat French fries thinking that was going to be my strategy for health. And what turned me off of that, and I hope this gives some solace to parents with kids who are struggling with how to eat well on any side of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. After a couple weeks of that, A, losing 0 weight, but B, feeling crappy, just feeling hungry an hour later, not able to perform. I played a lot of sports in high school, not able to perform. I would get on the field and just be completely sapped of energy, angry, miserable. My body wasn't used to having so few nutrients coming in with my lunch. I quickly got off that path. And I think we can trust our kids a little bit more in that too, where if we raise them with, here's how our family eats, but more importantly, here's how good you feel when you feel how our family eats, then they'll have a little bit more of a backbone to fall back on when there are the pressures that we can't avoid. I mean, social eating for all of us as humans is a problem. I'm sitting here listening to you and thinking additionally about how I eat when I'm pressured for time or running through an airport and starving. When you set yourself up for success because you've had healthy options around you, you're in a good place. When you crowd them out with bad options, you're not in such a good place. Mm-hmm. So I do think that we can trust our kids a little bit more in that too. I do want to ask this question before I know we have to let you go. We get asked from a lot of parents, is it okay if my kid eats the same thing every day? If it's a healthy thing, is it okay if they eat the same thing every day?
Well, I'm going to say, as a nutritionist, I'm not going to say it's not okay, but what I'm going to say is I'm going to encourage you to branch out because variety is the spice of life.
Create that second plate.
Yeah.
What did you call it? The learning plate.
plate.
I love that. I'm totally
You have
holding
no
on to
idea.
that.
This is life changing.
But variety is so key.
It's so important.
It's so important. So, what I would say is that if you have a child that eats peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day with a sliced apple, make it peanut butter on crackers, peanut butter and jelly on crackers with a sliced apple.
Change up the bread.
Change it up. Start bridging
Tortilla.
to some different things. Yes.
Okay.
It's
nice.
a peanut butter and jelly burrito. So I want to ask one question. I know for me, I'll start. So the question I'm going to ask is a way that you ate growing up and how you're trying to change it or how you changed it for your children. Like for me, it would be understanding more. I try to teach my children how when they tell me how they feel after they ate, for them to start to draw conclusions about it. Like last night when we're having ice cream, Carmen is obviously, speaks more than the 2, and the 10-month-old, although Rafa talks a lot too. But like she said to me, she says, you know what, I'm going to have one more little bite of the ice cream because I don't want to get a tummy ache afterwards. And like then she decided when she was going to be done. And I kind of let them do that rather than being like, okay, no more, because then it ends up being an issue and a fight. So I love watching her as we've sort of developed this conversation over food and how it leaves us feeling afterwards, for her to start to be able to feel her body and draw conclusions from that. Go, you, Daphne.
Yeah, I think, I mean, definitely there are times when I find that my kids, and this is something that I think we put such a preference when I was growing up on healthy foods. Healthy foods are in our house. Healthy foods are all around us. Health, that it actually made the taboo and the allure of the unhealthy foods when I was able to access them that much more heightened.
How would you access them?
So at school we had a co-op that it's funny because it's so, again, as parents who might be struggling through it with kids, I just want to give them the sort of counter of that, where whether or not you think your kids are paying attention to you, they are. Whether or not you think they're being receptive to you, they are. So even though I was angry that I couldn't have, my mom, Dunkaroos were all the rage when I was in, 5th grade or whatever. And I had to have Dunkaroos. My mom was like, over my dead body, am I buying you Dunkaroos? But I would get to the coop and I would, pay out the nose for the Dunkaroos, and they didn't make me feel good. They weren't as satisfying. They didn't taste nearly as good as I thought they were going to, which is oftentimes the case. And so I ended up working with the coop to bring in, at the time, these smoothies that were a novelty then, and just to have some healthier popcorn wasn't there. So just to bring some alternative options in, which ended up being really good for me, because then I still felt like I got to have the social experience of, we go as a clique after school to buy these things, and then we have our little snack time, and I had a way to do that in a way that was healthy and balanced and still gave me the social experience. I think for me personally, my craving around food is always, I want the celebration. I want the fun of it. I want to be with my friends or my family, people that I love, and share in that. And I think being left out of that was scarier to me and more disappointing than actually the food itself being one way or the other.
I have to say that you're like the most fun person to eat with. She always, like, whenever we have like double date, she always like finds like this amazing restaurant, and she of course Daphne knows everybody, knows the chef, and like is like, okay, you're gonna try this and this, and then we're gonna do this, and then and you just get to taste everything. So fun always.
Well, I love that you guys are always game to let me order like everything.
No, it's great because you're so much more fun than we are.
That's so fun.
What did you do differently than how you grew up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was born and raised in Indiana, and I was part of the Clean Plate Club as a kid.
Okay.
So couldn't leave the dinner table till I cleaned my plate. So with my own children, I don't plate their food. I stopped plating their food when they entered school, meaning that I would make dinner. I used to make dinner and put everything on their plate and serve them their plate. When they entered school, I was like, I'm not doing that anymore, because it just sets you up for the struggle.
So like buffet style?
Yeah, family style. I adopted family style meals where you just put platters and bowls in the center, and you teach your children to pass things around, and they serve themselves. They take what they want. They take how much they want. As a parent, I was like completely out of the game of telling them what to eat or how much, and it worked beautifully. I have all my clients do that now. And I remember my second daughter, Madeline, she was probably 7. She came up after about 4 nights of doing this family style meal. She came up and said, Mommy, are we going to have our dinners like this every night? It's like a party. And I said, yeah, do you like it? She's like, oh my God, I love it. And that's how I serve all my children's friends. That's how I've served our family. And talk about giving your child full agency over their own food selections and how much they eat and what they eat, and also exposing them to all those foods you want them to eat, because they're in the middle of the table and they got to pass them around. They got to be polite. They've got to smell it and look at it and at least get it to the next child or adult at the table. So that was a big thing. I was like, I'm not going to be controlling over my children's eating. And plating food is sort of that first tier of being controlling with food.
You're so right.
And so we do family style. It's amazing. I teach all my clients to do family style. They always come back and say the dynamic, everybody's relaxed. Family meals are so much more fun. Everybody is happier, and eventually they're starting to partake on everything.
Let everyone know, where can we follow and find you and learn more?
So jillcastle.com, super simple. I have all my books there, programs. I'm a blogger and a podcaster too, so you can follow my podcast and blog, which are both called The Nourished Child.